So this is actually Eric, the co-founder and CEO of Ramp, who can also, it's my pleasure to have him with us for the first time. So we can talk about founder mode, but why don't you start with just, I'm sure almost everybody here is an avid user of a Ramp card, but what they might not know and might not have context for is like what the mission and vision of Ramp is.
Yeah, so first, when you think about the name Ramp, it actually goes to very old concepts. In physics, there's these simple machines, the inclined plane, lever, pulley, screw. They reduce the force needed to perform work. And if you think about one of the most important classic ideas in businesses, it's you want to manage your costs. And yet, for many, many years, the tools that people use to run their business, credit cards, payment systems, expense management, all that, were designed with incentives to get people to spend more money, earn points, multipliers, rewards, all kinds of good things that were subtly not in your interest. So we said, why don't we just do the simple thing? Why don't we come out with credit cards, tools to spend that are designed to help companies reduce the amount that they spend? So it was this very simple idea. How do we make it easier to do work? How do we make it such that all the force you're exerting, all the capital you're spending goes a little bit further, your time goes a bit further? Flash forward to today, we support over 40,000 businesses from early stage to, I think, the extraordinary ones, Airbnb, Shopify, you name it. We help the average company reduce their expenses by about 5 to, on the high end, about 15% per year, and we've shown this very clearly quantitatively. The way you can think about it is we offer credit cards, expense management, bill payments, procurement, now even treasury, but what we focus on is not easier to use expense reports that do themselves, books that close themselves, money that finds its way to higher yield. And so it's just really, in some sense, taking a very simple idea, taking it seriously, and offering it to lots of folks out there.
So you basically have been doing this for about 5 years.
Yeah.
Got to roughly how many employees, how much revenue, rough scale?
Yeah, so we are 2,254 days old. We launched 5 years and 3 months ago, and we employ about 1,100 people. And we help companies manage today over $75 billion a year across cards, bill payments, and the like.
Cool. Now, so what I want to discuss for the audience is what are the ingredients to get to that scale in 5.3 years? So to me, from observing, there's like 3 topics. One is hiring the right people that allow you to get to that level of scale. Second is the velocity of execution, particularly around product, which I've publicly said is the best I've ever seen in my career. And then third is how do you cut through the clutter, like credit cards, business credit cards, expense management. It's kind of a commoditized industry. You had to start from scratch and become the default. And how did you do that? So let's start with hiring first. What kind of people do you hire at Ramp, and how has that allowed you to have a competitive edge?
So I think everyone who's a founder in this room, and it's mostly founders here, know this and remember this. Where you incorporate the company, you send it maybe to Delaware, maybe now Texas, wherever you choose to incorporate. You're 2 or 3 people, it's a sheet of paper, and that's it. And along the way, you raise the money, you have the product, you have all the trappings of building a company, and you forget that all a company is a collection of people, full stop. Or I think as Vinod says, the team you build is the company that you build. And we just try to obsess over that. Early days, and I remember your concept of almost like you're trying to produce a Hollywood film is almost a great analogy for what you're trying to do in the early days. It's how do you go and find people with extraordinary spikes that by them being there actually induces other people to want to come. How do you find more extraordinarily talented people? And so at the most basic level, we're looking for very spiky people. We're not looking for folks who are completely well-rounded. We're looking for people who are extremely good at 1 or 2 specific things that are very important. We have problems, gaps, everything in our company, but if you find extraordinarily spiky people, you can take care of a lot of the rest. And so, in the early days, some of these folks, as we were kind of in the, down to the first 10, folks look like Calvin Lee. Calvin, we met when he was a freshman at MIT. We hired him as an intern that freshman winter, not too competitive to hire freshman interns. He ended up graduating from MIT in 2.5 years. We convinced him to leave or to not go to a very fancy hedge fund, instead to come to Ramp early days. Viral Patel, I think at 14, was going to WWDC, sold a company to Apple, which is now Shortcuts. He joined right out of college. And so we were trying even for years prior to starting Ramp to identify and scope out great people. I think you've talked about this. You give a great talk about the art of hiring, where the markets are very good once people have been working for a lot of years to know how to price things. The large AI labs, large tech companies, everyone's going after people because the market rate is known. But if you're looking very, very early, you can find these very spiky people. And so we look for extreme spikes.
How do you use an interview process to identify spikes versus the normal interview process kind of looks for homogenization?
Yeah. So I think some of it is even before the interview. A lot of folks build out really elaborate job descriptions. I want this skill set. I want that. They need to be good at this as well. We need to look for that. And you design even more interviews to go and suss out all the different things that people can do, and then everyone comes together. No one says, I'm out, and you hire the person. And I would argue that is basically backwards at the beginning when you're trying to find really spiky people. If anything, if you can write job descriptions to look at like just one skill set or just two, as few as you can, if you can really streamline it down, then you can get much more, you can start to get to much more interesting kind of insights of who is exceptionally good at just this. And so I think it starts first with a clear scope in mind, a clear job description, and then I actually think a lot of hiring is just hunting. It's actually going out and trying to find companies that are really exceptional at one particular skill set, people who are really great. Maybe you try to hire them, you ask them for advice. Who else do you know who's coming up who's really, really good? And so I think a lot of it actually starts in the pre-interview. And then once you start actually meeting people, you get into process. I think trying to find signs or flashes of some extraordinary ability in some way. And so then, now there's almost the meme in AI companies where you look for IMO gold or silver medalists, who was winning math competitions at 15, 16 before it was totally gamed. I think that's gone a little bit. I mean, one that's worked really well for us is, it turns out there were a lot of engineers in our team who were raised on Minecraft. By the time they were 14 or 15 years old, they were running private Minecraft servers, and you meet more of them, and you'd find out some of them paid through college, like made hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like have you met a 14-year-old? Like there's people who were actually going and doing this when they were that young, paying their way through. And so trying to look for people, I mean, it can be technical capabilities, intense focus in sports, persistent knowledge, GPAs. Like there's dropouts too who we've hired, but people who were very extreme in one area. I think you can start to, when you look for extreme skill sets, pull that out. That's often when you have signs.
And then on extreme people, they tend to have weaknesses in other areas.
Yes.
Do you just ignore the weaknesses? Let's say the weaknesses are not integrity-based.
Yeah.
Let's just exclude that category. Yeah. Are you just totally fine with spiky talent in areas you need to innovate and just offset the weaknesses some other way?
I think so. Like I think that when people think a lot about businesses, they sort of imagine these late-stage products, companies that are ready for all scenarios, can handle the times that are up, the times that are down. And I think a much better analogy, and others have used this analogy for an early-stage startup, and even mid-stage, is it's almost more like an F1 racer. It looks really weird. It's a strange car. It can break down after the race, but it goes very fast, and it's built to spec. And so I would argue it is acceptable and okay to understand what are the issues. Obviously, there's integrity-based things. You want to make sure it's a comfortable working environment in enough people are treated well. But I think that actually you have to accept the defects if you want to find extreme talents. Because at the core of it, I mean, back to what all of us are doing, we're given a small amount of money, and we're tasked with the goal of going out there and creating billions and billions of dollars in value, which is extraordinarily unlikely. Statistically, the odds are very much against us. And so to have even a shot of doing this, I think you need to find not just mispricings, but also, in some sense, the market pays up for well-rounded. It doesn't pay necessarily well for extreme spikes, but some other defects. And that can be your alpha. That can actually be where you separate from other companies.
Yeah, so we have a video that we can share that Eric gave a whole presentation on just this topic, which I recommend to all of you. Second thing is, this sounds very time intensive, like the sourcing, identifying candidates even before they're interviewing. How much time do you allocate to actually recruiting?
If I'm doing it right, at least a third of my time.
And so as an example, I remember our first board meeting. We literally had pages and pages of LinkedIn profiles to review for every position. That was actually the board meeting. Yeah. It was like 80%, like let's review profiles.
Yeah.
So then, since day one, basically, that's been the priority.
We still talk about hiring. Development is like a core topic that comes up time and time again. I think it's probably half of our conversations and during monthly catch-ups.
And so then another interesting thing is how you basically don't do senior hiring.
Yeah.
Almost everybody but one, I believe, of the
Yes.
core leadership team was promoted from within. Talk about why, and now it's a conscious strategy.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, we did a little bit of each, and tried an error, and then you just came up to me at an offsite once and said, "We're not hiring any more senior people."
Yeah.
And I said, "That's great. I agree, because all your junior people are phenomenal." So talk about like the strategy of internal promotions only.
So we have this term inside of Ramp called super ICs, or super individual contributors, and I think it's come back in different concepts, like like Brian's talk on founder mode, to even just the growth of documentaries like Jiro Dreams of Sushi, Chef's Table. This sense of craft. I believe, and I would argue, if you have an organization that is designed around finding spikes and empowering people who have spikes to do a lot, you inherently want to be looking for people who have a sense and obsession with craft, and that can be extraordinary speed and throughput in engineering. That can be perfectly built systems. That can be, there's someone on our sales team who says, "I want to build the Alabama football program of sales," is really the focus. And there can be craft in many ways, in many parts of your department, but I think fundamentally it comes to finding people who are care about the details, or obsessive enough to go down into what copy you're putting into this press release. How does this product, each of the screens, really feel? And they're upset if it's not actually great, if it could be better. And so a lot of what we try to do is first start. I would argue it's easier to hire for that than it is to hire for these super managers who are working through lots of people. And so this came from this idea of, okay, we're going to hire for craft, and we're going to be have processes where we can actually discern ability to build well-crafted products. And then once you see people are doing well, you stretch them. I think like often the most productive employees are the people who are walking around and surrounding their desks, who's busy. You can see who are becoming natural leaders and start to expand their management scope. And so it came much more, I think, the ability to find great people, continue to stretch them, to find great mentors, to go deep on the craft is a much easier thing. It has fewer defects in that process, and you could do much more reliably. I would say we experience the cost if you hire executives, and when you part ways, it's really damaging. I'd argue not parting ways is probably more damaging, but the cost is enormous because it takes a number of months for them to build up their team. Then they built up their team, the processes have changed, it's parted ways. You also send a signal to people of, often for the best people, we're going to go out of the company, we're not going to promote you, which I think is very damaging to people's motivations. And I think we sort of take the defects on the other side. We say, let's find great people, let's stretch them, let's remind people that, like, if you do great work here, you are going to run this company one day. And I think it forces the right motivations, the right kind of drives. And I think there's a lot of great mentors out there where often it comes down to the work that you're doing. People just need an hour here, an hour there to focus and help get them on the right path. And so that's why we do what we do. It could just be I'm bad at hiring executives, and maybe it's a me problem. But
turning a bug into a feature or whatever.
Yeah, it could be. But I think that for most people, we're just wrong a lot. Like, I think about our growth team often that says, like, if you're the best baseball player out there, you hit 30 to 40% of the times you're up at the plate, 60 to 70% of the time you miss, and you're like an all-time great. And I think in hiring, maybe the best are like 50% accurate.
For senior folks.
Especially. And so I just think that's too high and too costly. And unless you really know, if you can be kind of discerning from people, go that way. I would do that.
Okay, let's shift into the velocity of product execution, which has really been incredible. How did you forge that initially? And then how, as you scaled from 100 people to 200 to 1,000, how do you keep up that velocity?
So there were some things that we lucked into. The day count thing was a really funny thing. So our first board meeting, we were 133 days into the company. And I put it on there. I don't know if I ever told you, because I was like a little nervous or embarrassed to say, we've only done this much in 133 days, judged based on the results. We passed it, we had a good time. 2 months later, it was time for the next board meeting, and I copied and pasted the deck. I changed a bunch of stuff out. And I remember the last thing I did was I changed it from 133 to 199, and I was like, whoa. It's been 66 days. We're about 7 people. We were going up against American Express. They had 70,000 people. We worked pretty hard. We couldn't outwork those number of hours. And we were thinking about it, like, did we get the same amount done as the previous 66? Do we get less, or do we get a lot more? And as we kind of audited our calendar, went back through it, there were certain hours that really, really, really mattered and pushed us forward and inflected the trajectory of the company. There are other ones that didn't matter so much. And so we still count the days today because it gives us everyone the ability. I think as companies get bigger, your calendar just happens to you. You're stuck in all these meetings. People don't have the permission to say this is silly and I'm going to say no to this. But we count the days as a reminder of both all you have is time. How can you get more, like a little bit more done with each hour? But two, it gives people permission to say no to things so you can say yes. And so one of the things that we did early on, and we stuck with us, is counting the days. I think that inherently necessitates a focus on managing your inputs carefully. One of the primary inputs that all of us have is time, is labor. Where are you actually going and spending it? I think a lot of driving output and velocity is thinking not just about the end results, but how are you getting there and how are you improving your throughput. And so maybe to have an analogy, I think a lot of folks, founders, the intuition is we need to set ambitious goals. We're going to triple revenue this year. We are going to go and inflect some far out thing. The whole company needs to work towards that. And I think it's very challenging for a lot of people to deal with that. Like imagine not a lot of people necessarily here look like they'd be on the football team, but let's say that you showed up to football practice and they said, okay, everybody, we're going to practice today to win the Super Bowl. You're like, I have no idea what to do. What do the great coaches do? They go out and they say, okay, we're gonna run sprints today. We're gonna lift weights tomorrow. We're gonna run these plays and we're gonna watch game tape. You get really good at the basics, at managing the inputs, and if you do that right, the score will take care of itself. And so a lot of what we did in the early days was understand where do we want to go. We wanted to win the Super Bowl too, but what are the inputs that are predictive and connect to it, and then would manage very, very closely to that. And so RAMP is very famous for a very fast throughput and pace of engineering velocity. One of the ways that we got there was actually just going and estimating how much could we get done this week, then we checked how much we got done, and we asked what were all the things that got in the way. What were all the low-value uses of the time and eliminated it. And so a lot of what we're doing is just careful obsession over how inputs connect to outputs, and then what are the low-value uses of time, and then just get rid of them, and just do that constantly.
And so when you had tens of employees to maybe low hundreds, you and Kareem could do that, by inspection yourself.
Yeah.
When you get to hundreds to thousands of employees, are there techniques you can borrow to continue that and preserve that?
So it's a super good question. I mean, one, I think there's like maybe a cultural point on the importance of like rules versus standards. A lot of people try to run their company through rules. Under these circumstances, you can do this, you can't do that. The best sports teams, and I think the best organizations, have really high standards. Craft is kind of a proxy word or code for this, where if people expect, I think, late in Steve Jobs' career, there was very little work that got to him that was truly bad. It was to a certain level, because you knew that if you were going to go and you were to Steve, like, you needed to be on. And if people's expectations of everyone in the organization is high, for design, for speed that we'll get back to customers, for the speed that we're going to ship products, to the clarity that we're going to communicate, the standards are lifted up. And so I actually think impressing on the importance of standards versus rules is one of the very important things you can do. I think next, one of the things that's unusual about RAMP, like people know us as a fintech. I actually think we're a productivity company masquerading as a fintech. Really what we do is we sell time. It's how can we help our customers spend less money, spend less time, and we obsess over that. So we have this far out goal, and we give people their own abilities to go and say, okay, I'm going to work on this product, that product. You can pick whatever it is you think will go and maximize that, but we have kind of a common rubric to go and test it. And so, across, whether it's the bill pay team, the card pay team, procurement team, whatever it is, we can go team by team and look at actually how much money and time did you save for customers, and allows people to have, even on different teams, a common conversation across very different types of products.
So you have a standard vocabulary or standard metric, and then everybody can, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The last topic is, as you mentioned and alluded to, when you started the company, you were competing with Amex Corporate Card, 70,000 employees, one of the most famous brands ever, and other well-funded startups, that people won't remember. How did you cut through the clutter initially? Like how, we start with like 7 people or less, 3 or $4 million or less. How did you deal with like I don't have the resources to compete with all these people, but in this industry is considered to be commoditized, boring.
Yeah.
How did you? What was even the intellectual framework you started with?
So I think one of the most impactful statements in startups that I had heard early on in my journey, I think it was Justin Kahn at the time. He was one of the partners at YC, and he basically said something to the effect of, the biggest battle of a startup is people not giving a shit. Like you can work for years and years and slave away, and you're very proud. Put out this release and no one hears about it. And so the question is not how do I have a great message and put it out there, but how do I be interesting? How do I be different and distinct? And when we started, we spent a lot of time on sort of multiple levels, and you'll remember these decks and analysis, but we actually just printed out the homepages of every single one of our competitors. There was a lot of them. We looked at what they were saying. We looked at the color palettes, what they were doing. And it turned out if you looked at a lot of these websites, you can have any color card you want as long as it's blue. Everyone was selling these interesting things of like, use this and you'll be like the guy with access to lounge and the card will be heavy or you'll get more points. It was about access. But it felt it was in conflict to the reality we were living in. Kind of in the 2020s, the scarce resource wasn't money, it was time. You were getting assaulted by notifications. You had all these like tedious and low value works. And so we actually thought, what if you actually did things very different? It wasn't blue, it wasn't red, it wasn't black, it was white. It was sparse. You can see very clearly it was visually distinct. And so how do you work on that kind of subliminal level where you actually look very different? It's not about spending more, which everything was kind of around, but how do you be diametrically opposed? We're about spending less. And so in some sense, operating a very distinct part was important to us. Next, people like rivalries. And we knew this. Coke versus Pepsi, Uber versus Lyft. When we started, we were focused on Amex, I think was a big one, but also the startup world compared us to Brex. They were already worth billions of dollars by the time that we started. We were very happy to go and drive a contrast and be meant every time someone else was getting mentioned, we were getting mentioned too. And we got really slingshotted up very, very quickly. And so in some sense, you don't want to be kind of in the periphery around, but you want to be very distinct from others, and if you can, diametrically opposed, and that starts to put you in the conversation constantly. And then last, look, I think great brands aren't built on how you look or what you say, but how you show up time and time again over years. And we knew that if we wanted to grow 10% per week, whatever percent per month, that might just be adding 2 companies a week, 5 companies a week, and making sure they have like an amazing, amazing experience. It was obsessing over when they had feedback, we heard it, and then we, back to the point around velocity, it was shipped within 2 days. You couldn't get that anywhere else. It was going through by hand, finding out ways to save people money. And in B2B, the currency of growth is referrals. It's people saying, I used it and I loved it. Even today, at our scale, over 1/3 of our customers are coming through word of mouth. People talking about how the experience is so great. And over time, that is a much more powerful way to compete. And so it's being distinct. It's driving your contrast. Who are you against? And then last, having this great experience that people had. So that way, when you're in conversation, people say, you know what? I talked to my friend. I trust them. I'm going to go over.
One more tactical question about this. So for a B2B company, you use a fair amount of social media. Do you do that yourself? Like how do you actually think through the use of like particularly X in social media?
I mean, one just like a macro point. People work in businesses, like go on Instagram, they wear Nike or On or Hoka shoes, whatever they are, listen to Spotify, have these amazing consumer experiences. They're people too, and they go wherever else you would imagine that they go. And so actually just having like well-crafted, well-designed experiences in B2B, I think was very overlooked for a lot of years. Next, I think whether it's on social media, other places, just clarity in thought and communication, I think is very underrated. I think that people are interested in hearing from other people. It's easier than ever to spin up. Anyone can spin up an ad. Anyone can be on a channel. It's very hard to be distinct, to be clear, and I think that people want to buy from other people. And so ultimately kind of spending time on distilling, like, what am I saying? What is the brand saying? How do we go and show up in ways that feel authentic and real and not corporate? And again, back to being like different and standing out from the crowd was very important. And so I think there's folks that give great frameworks around this. I think Lulu at Rostra and her focus on going direct, I think, is remarkably good. You can learn a lot from just studying the mechanics of how they do that. I also, funny title, but genuine recommendation, there's a great book called Trust Me, I'm Lying by Ryan Holiday. He's known now for being like a Stoic philosopher, author, which is very funny given a lot of his first books were sort of about manipulation. But you know, it focuses on telling people how to cut through, how to be interesting, and I would recommend that too.
Cool, awesome. We just ran out of time, but it's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Hope this is useful. Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it.